Introduce Art Suggs to come and speak. And just to give you all a heads up, Art needs to be in Ithaca, so as soon as he's done, he's gonna have to boogie on out of here, but we'll stay and finish the, we'll hold you in our hearts as we finish up, as we wrap it up.
We won't take it personally.
Yeah.
One of those fun all-day church meetings. This is going to be a little bit unusual. I'd like to sort of, not so much a sermon, but talk with you about some thoughts on it. I assume that you saw the little sentence that I wrote for the internet about what the sermon was about. And that notion of running home to mama. Where I got that phrase, you know, it's a common phrase in our culture, but where I got it was from the movie Hunt for Red October. There's a scene in there. How many have seen Hunt for Red October? Okay, about half of you. Anyway, it's about submarines, and one of the characters by the name of Jonesy is the sonar guy, and he's extremely adept at listening. That's what his job is. And so he heard something in the background while he's listening to the sonar, and what he's hearing actually is this other submarine that is running virtually silent, but not 100% silent, but almost. And so here's the dialogue. He's talking to the captain. He says, "I heard something in the background, real faint. After all those subs took off, I caught it again and I got it on tape. I watched it through the computer and was able to isolate this sound." And so then he plays it, and it sounds just like kind of sound. And then when I asked the computer to identify it, what I got was magma displacement. "You see, sir, the SAPS software, Systems Application Processing Software, was originally written to look for seismic events." And then he tells the captain, "I think when it gets confused, it kind of runs home to mama." Captain says, "I'm not following you, Jonesy." "Sir, I'm sorry. Listen to it at 10 times speed." And then he plays the tape of it at 10 times speed. You hear this click, 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 click. And then he concludes, "Now that's gotta be man-made." And he's able to show that this was actually a sub rather than the magma displacement on it. Human beings run home to mama too, in this same sense. And that's what I want to talk to you about mostly this morning. Let me do a little bit of autobiography on this. When I became interested in theology was also at the time that I was studying physics in college. And I was taught, in no uncertain terms, that Christ had a dual nature. So that Christ was God and a human being. I was also taught, in no uncertain terms, that he's the only one, unique, the only Son of God, who had that dual kind of nature. And what was particular about it was that otherwise those two natures are mutually exclusive. So you got either divinity or you've got humanity, but it's like one or the other. The two Venn diagrams actually never even touch, except for this one person. So Jesus was the only one. And so therefore, we venerate Christ as being great and holy and the only one, and we tend to denigrate ourselves. And it shows up, for example, in our prayers. You know, the kind of prayers that I was taught had words such as supplication or pleading or imploring or beseeching. And so we, as the lowly worm kind of beings, beseeching the great God on high. And so that's the way I was raised, the kind of theology I was raised with. I was also taught at the same time that the singular best analogy for Christ had to do with light. And it's just like, wow, that's like a pretty cool thing. Because light had this same dual nature. It's either a particle or it's a wave. And somehow or another, it's able to show both on it. And so I'm learning about all of that kind of stuff in college, and I'm thinking, wow, what a perfect analogy for this understanding of Christ. So here's this one being that exists that's able to have both of these kind of natures, and here's light, beautiful light, that also exhibits both of these kind of natures. 3 years ago, this part you might find tedious, but I'm going to bowl your way through it anyway. This part, 3 years ago, an experiment happened in France that has been making its way around the world philosophically. And so what happened was that a guy by the name of Francois Carbone, he's at the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lucerne, so in France at a huge expensive physics lab there. He figured out a way to ask if light is both a wave and a particle at the same time. An unusually brilliant experiment. Never been done before in the history of the world. And he figured out a way to do it. And here's the part that, just do your best on this. But here's from a statement made by the lab back in March of 2015. The experiment is set up like this. A pulse of laser light is fired at a tiny metallic nanowire. The laser adds energy to the charged particles in the nanowire, causing them to vibrate. Light travels along this tiny wire in two possible directions, like cars on a highway. When the waves traveling in opposite directions meet each other, they form a new wave that looks like it's standing in place. Here, this standing wave becomes the source of light for the experiment, radiating around the nanowire. This is where the experiment's trick comes in. The scientists shot a stream of electrons close to the nanowire, using them to image the standing wave of light. As the electrons interacted with this confined light on the nanowire, they either sped up or slowed down. Using the ultra-fast microscope to image the position where this change in speed occurred, Carbone's team could now visualize the standing wave, which acts as a fingerprint of the wave nature of light. While this phenomenon shows the wave-like nature of light, it simultaneously demonstrated its particle aspect as well. The electrons pass close to the standing wave of light. They hit the light's particles, the photons. As mentioned above, this affects their speed, making them move faster or slower. This change in speed appears as an exchange of energy packets, the quanta, between electrons and photons. The very occurrence of these energy packets shows that the light on the nanowire behaves as a particle. I'm done now. Thank you for bearing with me on that. Now, here's what it means. Here's the philosophy part of it. Here's the part that's utterly astounding. And that is that this showed that light is not just a particle or a wave, but rather has a beingness, an existence that then just simply shows particle nature or wave nature. But it's one thing. So its beingness is at a higher plane than just showing a particular kind of behavior based upon what kind of experiment is happening at the time. And I think now you're about ready to see where I'm going with this on human beings. One order of being. I was taught that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I was also taught that somehow or another we are children of God. But somehow or another, the connection was never made in my mind that it's the same thing. It's like, no, Son of God, we bow down and we praise. We say our prayers. But we're children of God. It says in the book of Hebrews that Jesus is the pioneer of our faith. It says the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. And I never really thought about it that much, but a pioneer is not a different species, not a different order of being, but rather just somebody who happens to be ahead of us, and typically somebody worth following. Now this notion that there's actually just one order of being has huge consequences for how we live our lives. Because it means that we're responsible. Years ago, this would be in 2005, I had the chance to visit the Holy Land. And so I'm there in Bethlehem, which was 99% Muslim at that point, and Jerusalem and a few other kind of areas. And I took a journal with me, and I was writing in my journal every day, trying to keep track of what happened that day, but also how I felt about it. And I found myself writing something that it's just like, I don't know where it came from, but it wasn't from my mind. It just like showed up on the print. And what I had written in my journal was that I'm not going to pray for peace for the Middle East anymore. And I looked at what I had just written. It's just like, that's the opposite of what you should have written. It's like, if any place needs prayers, it's the Middle East. And I sit there and I looked at what I had written, and then I realized why. And the reason why is that it's because it's not up to God. It's not like I'm sitting back here hoping, maybe if I pray hard enough, maybe God might grant peace in the Middle East. God sure is bloody unwilling to do peace in the Middle East, hasn't done it in centuries. Maybe it's because we're all not trying hard enough to convince this reluctant God to grant peace in the Middle East. Hair on the back of my neck standing up. I realized that it's up to us, that we're the agents in this world. And you take that kind of theological understanding, cultural understanding of centuries of warfare between Jews and Muslims and Christians, and then you overlay it with science that came out of France, saying that there's just one order of being to what we call energy or matter or light. And then I look at the theology that I was taught in high school and college, and I realize we can do better. We can understand the nature of who we are as divine agents in the world, incarnated. We can do better with our understanding, and then consequently with our actions in the world. It means that we're responsible for what happens in the world, and that is very scary. And so the standard response of most people in scary situations is to run home to mama. Meaning we go back to the old beliefs that, God, I wish God would grant us, a decent legislature, would grant us a decent Supreme Court, would grant us peace in the Middle East, would grant us clean energy. It's just like, no, it's up to us. We have agency. We have the ability. Instead, we're crying and complaining and running home and wondering why God doesn't do something about it. It means we're responsible. It says in the Gospel of John that Jesus is the light of the world. And just a couple chapters later, Jesus says, you are the light of the world. There was one time, a couple years back, when I decided I wanted to preach on that second verse about you being the light of the world, where Jesus tells that to his disciples and his listeners at the time who gathered around him. So I go online and I start looking for music. I don't have Rose's ability to do this, but she finds more
I was
music
just
than
thinking,
than
the
that's
song
amazing.
we did, Blessing to the World, you are a blessing to the world, that we just listened to,
Uh-huh.
is just lined up with what you just said really nicely.
Sure.
Not that I could find, though. So I'm sitting there, I go online, and I look for music that goes with the theme of you are the light of the world. Zip. Couldn't find anything. Found one piece after another, after another, after another, about Christ being the light of the world. And so that's, once again, just an example of how we're afraid of this thought, that we're responsible, that we actually really do have one nature that is in alignment with, actually is with, the divine. And so therefore, it is incumbent upon us, it is our job, it is our calling, it is our destiny to mature into understanding exactly who and what we are. Divine agents in a physical world, in many ways a beautiful but broken world, but a divine agency with holiness, spirit within our flesh, united with one another, connected with one another, one order of being. Rabbi Hillel, two millennia ago, was asked about the golden rule. So it came from the book of Deuteronomy, and then Jesus quotes it. Jesus is not the one who made that one up, but quoted it from Deuteronomy. And he was asked about the golden rule, what his opinion on it was. And his answer was simplicity itself. It said, go study it. And what I'd suggest to you is that, yes, Jesus is the light of the world. So are you. Go study it. Amen. I do have time for some questions or...
The hands go up fast.
You reminded me so much years ago when I was still a non-traditional student in an English class, and it was a cross-listed with women's studies over at BU. And I just had this urge to go through the entire New Testament and document for myself every internet interaction between Jesus and women. And that's what I wrote the paper on. Every single thing was positive. It was respectful, and it really outlined the respect and balance and love, whatever. And I thought at the time, who says he didn't marry Mary? Who said that he had to be without a partner? And so it just makes me think that the people who interpreted that had their own cultural beliefs that, but I mean, everything, right? Don't cast the first stone. And every interaction was so positive that it really opened my eyes. And I just felt like that connected because Jesus as a model, well, there's the model. And yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Real quick, the Native Americans have a saying that we're all just little bits of the sun. They recognize that we are the sun is us. And we could take that as S-O-N, but of course S-O-N, to me it's the same thing. It's light. I think that's simple but very profound.
Yeah. Vera?
So if we're all one being, I also include God in that. So he's responsible, it's he, she, whatever it is responsible besides the creation. So it's a whole, I see it as a whole group. So,
Interdependence at every scale.
Or you could call,
Or maybe you're trying to blow up the scales, like to disrupt the idea of scales, that we're not in a hierarchy, right? It's just interdependence along the web of life. Oh, I like that.
But that's why I've always had a
Well, that's
problem,
what you're
no,
gonna- I
no
like
offense, when people say God's in control, I've always had a problem because it's quite apparent that we've
Yeah.
been given free will, that we are the ones in control. And,
that goes right
Yeah,
back
like
to
what you
peace
were
in the
saying.
Middle East.
Responsibility.
Yeah, God's in
Right.
control.
Yes.
Well, he's doing a crappy job of it.
Right.
You know?
I agree.
And it's because there isn't an external being that we call
Yes.
divine, that if only we prayed hard enough, God would finally relent and do the right thing. It's more like us maturing into what our truer nature is.
Which is godlike.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
we
It's
need
an
to,
energy.
we need to wake up our consciousness. I mean, that's another Seth quote, that
And so-
that's the next step for the human race, to find out who we really are, wake up our consciousness and bring it into our normal consciousness.
So the Buddhists, I think, have a good idea on this, that one of two ways, you either enlightenment or awakening. Either one. Jerry.
Just want to throw a little positive optimism to it, is that critical mass necessary for the paradigm shift of consciousness is not 50%. It's a lot lower than that.
Yeah.
So it's our individual consciousness, we could add to the collective consciousness in hopes that it will hit the critical mass.
Thank you.
Very good.
And
Anyone
Jody,
else?
you had a thought, didn't you? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Oh,
when you were talking about the spiritual maturation or spiritual maturing, it made me think of one of the words that Jesus uses a lot, depending on how it's translated, as ripe, like ripening. We're ripening. You know what I mean? Like ripe timing. The fruit falls when it's ripe. So it's, I don't know. When I heard you
Yep.
say that, it's such a
Yeah.
beautiful thought that we're ripening
Yes.
into that full being. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
you have
Thank
a
you, Art.
thought?
Yeah, I can't remember who said it. I listened to a lot of things, but somebody was talking about, God has a plan for us. God has a plan. God's plan. God's plan. And I think, part of the act of growing up, this person was saying, if you went off to university and they told you, well, you're going to be studying this. That's my plan for you. Everybody would revolt. Nobody wants to be told, well, your job's going to be this. You're going to be studying this. We're going to be married to this person. We want our free will. We want to make our own plan. But, so the kind of passivity of turning it over to God, Jesus take the wheel, has never really sat well with me, because we are the ones driving, and if you have a license, you have a responsibility to drive well and not run people over, and to be sober, and you decide where you're going and how fast or slowly you're getting there, and where you stop for scenic adventures on the way. It's not just waiting, what is my purpose? Make it up. And if you want peace in the Middle East, go make it up. Instead of waiting around, because we are the ones we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
We can manifest that divine nature, or we can be passive little babies.
Make your mistakes and learn from them and then move on.
Even the statement, God has a plan for your life, buys into the separation.
I
In
never
Course
bought
in
into
Miracles
that.
kind of terms.
I don't want someone else to
So-
have a plan for me. I don't accept that.
Yeah.
I accept the responsibility.
Mhm.
I sure do.
Jim?
But that's the difference between the lens, right, of what you're saying when the dual is separate, God is out there when it became separate, and the interconnection. And it's, even in the program for the other, God within whom we live and breathe and have our being.
Mhm.
And who lives and breathes in and through us. That's my addition. But so from what you started with, that difference between the dualist versus our interconnection with God, and whom we live and breathe and have our being, and who lives and breathes and moves through us. So those questions become very different
Yeah,
depending on which of those lenses,
Yes.
Yeah.
right?
exactly.
I was
Yeah.
taught that
So
instead of
beautiful.
thinking about God's plan for us, or this omnipotent kind of plan, that it's more important for us to have faith in our life process, and to believe that there are, I don't know quite, that there's a reason right? There's a reason why we're all in this room right now. And though we may not know it, we each have our own plan that we've come up with. And at the same time, we have to have faith in life process. Mine, yours, and God's all, combined. And that it's not either or, it's both and. And the unfoldment is where the truth lies.
You can liken it to raising a child. The child will make one mistake after another, after another, after another, and the parent figure guides, corrects, guides all along as maturation then takes place. And that's what Spirit is doing with us.
And the parent has a longer term vision that the child is simply incapable of it at 8 years old rather than at 28. And so, we have to ask those children to have faith in us as parents that we can see beyond just this year and into other years. Yeah. I needed to hear that. Thank you.
And sometimes they make up their own mind it's better than your own.
Well, be that as it may.
There's independent-minded people.
Both hands. Oh.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Special guests, my good friends Julie and Bernie are going to do the special music today. And let's welcome them here.
Yay.
Thank you.
Do you need help with your crutches?
No, I'm just gonna
You're
sit
gonna
right
do it
here.
from there? Okay. So it's going to start with a Kundalini breath meditation led by Julie, and Bernie's going to be playing his original music on keyboard. So I'm very happy to have them here today. They're very good friends of mine, so I hope they choose to come back and join us again. We'll see.
So this is a very short meditation from the Kundalini Yoga tradition called Meditation for a Calm Heart. And this week has been pretty cray-cray, but we've got a lot of turbulence. Everybody has a lot of things going on in their life, even aside from national news. So this is a way to connect with that infinity within you, that calm place, that neutral, non-reactive place. So you can do the mudra, the hand and arm position, for as long as you like or not at all. It's very beautiful. You have your left hand on your heart center, just connecting with that place. And then the right arm is in Gyan Mudra, index finger and thumb tip meet. And you're just relaxing your shoulder down by your side. And if you get tired in that position or don't want to do it, you can put your right hand over your left or just rest your hands down your chest. So the eyes will be closed, but there's a breathing pattern, and you do it at your own pace, to your own capacity, never straining, never stressing. It's breathing in through the nose. You're going to inhale all the way up, feel the air move through. And at the top of the inhale, just pause, suspend the breath. And you just pause it for as long as it feels good to you, and then when you're ready to exhale, you exhale gently, easily through the nose. Breathe all the air out. And at the bottom of the exhale, pause and suspend the out breath. That's a breath that helps you confront your deepest fears. So just do it until you're ready to breathe in again. Through the nose, smoothly. Feel the thread of the breath moving all the way up. And pause. And then when you're ready, exhale. Just connect with your heart, connect with that place deep inside you, the center. Let everything rage and storm around you, but connect with that calm place within you that's always there. And continue at your own pace. Just continue this breathing. Continue the mudra if you choose, or just listen to this song. deep breath in, inhale. Suspend the breath briefly. And release.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to move, but it's my job to do.